when we adapt something into an opera, the questions maybe we need to ask ourselves is, first of all, why tell this story through opera? What about that medium has potential for this particular story? And then once something that didn't used to be an opera is an opera, what does that really mean? And especially, what does the music have to do with the world? Why and how is the music there that wasn't there before? So the first opera I'll talk about is a kind of ongoing project, which is an extremely complex literary source. And this is an opera called The Romance of the Rose, which is a very loose adaptation. I've been sort of saying inspired by Le Roman de la Rose, which is a medieval French allegorical poem, very long poem. And this opera was scheduled to premiere April 2nd of this year, and we canceled it and are in the process of rescheduling. It was going to premiere at Peak Performances at Montclair State University. So I think the reasons why this poem just immediately kind of like leapt to my mind as something that I wanted to work through in an operatic form. There's a lot of reasons. One, it has to do with the concept of allegory and how allegory is treated and manifested in this poem. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But also just, this is a very complicated, multifaceted, pan-philosophical poem. It's medieval literature, which is very different from contemporary literature in terms of how it treats its readers and the expectations that the reader has for it. So it's really wide-ranging. It's kind of bizarre at times. It covers so many different kinds of subjects of the human condition and just the world that we live in. So I feel like something this complex, you almost have to carve your own path through it, even just as a reader. So when you adapt a literary form into a time art, like a play or a movie or an opera, you always end up cutting stuff just because you can't take the, 30-hour experience of reading a book and turn it into something that like maybe tops off at 3 hours without cutting a lot and condensing things and eliminating plot points. But with something that was this rich, I almost felt like I felt a lot of creative freedom to kind of make my own story using a lot of elements from it and still feel like I was interacting with the original text, because you could really make 100,000 very different operas from this same source. So it was a really rich source to draw on. So, so yeah, that's kind of what I did, is sort of like made a new text from this brilliant old text. And the first clip I want to play, so just also to talk a little bit about the players, this opera is being co-produced by the Wet Ink Ensemble, which I'm a member of, and the executive director is Josh Modney, who is also an amazing violinist, and he'll be conducting the opera and playing in it. And together, he and I made a few distance video, audio clips over the last couple of months, just while it was fresh in our minds. So I'll be playing a few of those. So I'm going to play a clip from the very beginning of the opera. This is pretty much the only moment where the same thing is happening at the same time in the original text and in my opera. They both open with this character who is in the world of the poem, but also maybe kind of talking directly to us, the reader. And this character is telling us not to discount the truth of dreams, that there might be something in a dream that could have to do with real life. So this is pretty much verbatim how the opera starts. It's scored for tenor and violin. This is a recording of myself and Josh. So it's, soprano and violin, but it's exactly the same music. So this is the start of The Romance of the Rose.
Some say that dreams are flimsy doublespeak, and that we, once sleep has pulled its heavy blinds, masquerade in fancy and deceit. encountered by our thoughtless, dreaming minds. But may we not protest this condemnation? For dreams contain much more than artful lies. And aside from granting nighttime recreation, may edify, illumine, prophesize. Prophetic visions are the most celebrated subjects of dreams. The most common subjects include being chased or pursued, the feeling of flying, the feeling of falling, and erotic fantasies. All of which will be relevant for us tonight, because this is no ordinary dream. This is a love story.
Okay, so that begins the opera. We're invited into this kind of dream world. The character I was playing there, I don't really play it in the actual opera, is sort of an amalgamation of some characters in the original and then also kind of a contemporary person from our world. I mentioned allegory earlier, and just this idea of who the characters are in this opera has a lot to do with that. So allegory is a huge concept in medieval literature and, you know, today. But I think it has a lot of resonance with opera. Essentially, to really dumb it down in a way, an allegorical character is a character that represents something outside of the opera or outside of the imaginative world, something real. So there's this kind of like tether between something that's in an imaginary world with a concept. So in the Romance of the Rose, the original, there are allegories like Lady Reason, who is a woman in the opera who walks around and does stuff, but also is just a representation of reasonableness. Or the God of Love, who is, you know, again, a person committing actions and interacting and having conversations, but also a representation of the idea of romance. So I think this seemed useful to me because opera itself, of course, has a lot to do with allegory, and there's a lot of allegory of character and plot in opera, and even allegory of voices and voice types. So, you know, a soprano voice in an opera has something to do with purity or, you know, feminine wiles or something, and a bass voice can have allegorical content in terms of its, you know, maybe it's a sinister character, or it's a father character, or it's a, you know, buffo bass kind of comic relief person. So there's all these ways that we kind of map ideas and characterizations onto voices in opera. So for this opera, The Romance of the Rose, I wanted to kind of formalize this idea a little bit more and also bring in some electronics, which are some things that I like to work with. So there are kind of three main allegorical characters in the opera, the God of Love, Lady Reason, and Shame. And these are all present in some manner in the original text, although they've kind of changed their form in my opera, and there are also like 50 other allegorical characters in the original that are not in my opera. But I was trying to think of how far I could take this idea of allegory and how a caricature could have not only an allegory of voice type, like soprano or bass or something, but also of musical style. So singing in a kind of post-tonal romantic way, which is the God of Love, versus singing tonal music or singing kind of experimental music. And then the orchestration, also just having certain things that kind of are attached to certain players in a way that really marks them as this is what my voice and my music sounds like. And then the electronics for me serve both to separate these characters from the human species, that there is something about them that is more or other or more layered. And then also, again, to kind of to really solidify their allegorical comportment. So, what's more romantic than singing with a lot of reverb? And, if Lady Reason has a vocoder, she can always be in possession of a nice cadential chord, and Shame has distortion on her voice so that it's always kind of microtonally dissonant with the instruments. The other two down there, Idleness and Pleasure, those are sort of more minor characters, and I think I'm not going to show anything of theirs today. So I'm going to just play now a couple minute excerpt from a little later on in the first part of the opera, just so you can kind of hear these types interacting. And I imagine you will probably be able to tell who is playing the God of Love versus Lady Reason versus Shame without my having to point it out. This is from a workshop that we did, I think 2 years ago. So it's just piano, there's no instrumentation. This isn't 100% the actual cast. And, a lot of the musical details are a little different now. But this is sort of the allegorical triumvirate at the top of the opera here. So.
Close your eyes.
Okay, so I'll stop it there. But hopefully you can kind of get the idea of these distinct characters. And I think for me, really shaping them, not only with the style of music, but the style of singing, and also the electronics, can help us kind of track them through the opera and see how they're influencing the action, and also see how they're changing. Something that I was fascinated by in the original poem is the fact that these allegorical characters do not always behave the way that you think that they ought to. And it's an interesting question to think, how is it possible that a being who is supposed to be the literal representation of a concept can behave in a way that is in conflict with that concept? What does that say about our thoughts, about our ability to compartmentalize our own emotions and states of mind? So that, if you hear the God of Love singing with Shame's distortion, what's happening to him, or Lady Reason, if her vocoder becomes reverberant, what does that mean? So these are all things that are explored in the plot of the opera. And then I wanted to play a couple more clips of these allegories. So I mentioned in the last slide these multiple kinds of allegories, and another thing that I was interested in was an allegory of language. So they all have different types of words that they sing. The God of Love is the only one who sings the original medieval French, which he usually does in rhyming couplets that rhyme with an English translation. Lady Reasons has a lot of prose, and she also sings kind of highly sophisticated poetic forms, which I might talk about later. And shame was kind of a minor character in the original poem, part of a litany of undesirable allegories. I bumped her up in my opera just to have a nice 3-part phalanx of allegories, and because that seemed to me to be a powerful enough idea to stand up between Lady Reason and the God of Love. What is the other third kind of category of emotion or being? Okay, so that's shame. Hopefully you can get a sense of the distortion, which we're still kind of playing around with that, but it's right now it's kind of microtonal side bands on her voice, or on Shame's voice, and the way that the instruments sound. Then I just wanted to play a little clip of Lady Reason. This is another kind of for fun video that I made over the last couple of months. Lady Reason will be played by the phenomenal Brett Umlauf, who is another collaborator of mine. But in this case, I just made a recording of one of her first recitatives, so you can kind of hear how her vocoder operates. My feeling about Lady Reason, she's very distrustful of music, in fact, as am I occasionally, in terms of its ability to manipulate your emotions, but she likes to use it to make points, and she likes, to use it to emphasize certain things by just sort of harnessing the satisfaction you get when you go from 5/7 to 1 and that kind of thing. So in this recitative, this is basically taken verbatim from the opera, except that she is talking to someone in the opera who's talking back to her. This person has just been shot with Cupid's arrows and has fallen in love with a rose. So that's what she's talking about. So here is a bit of Lady Reason.
Greetings. I am Lady Reason. And you are a fool to succumb to the pangs of love, that weakness which preys on degraded minds. Fear not. I have come to instruct you on how to renounce this rose for good. Now tell me, do the wounds in your breast not smart? Well, then, do you not wish to be cured of your affliction? You don't know? How is it possible you should hesitate to choose between anguished tumult and good sense? You heard some music? Some beautiful, sad music? There is no such thing as sad music. Music cannot be sad, or frightened, or happy, or confused. It cannot indicate some state that it feels. It is not sentient. Music and love, twin sicknesses which hijack the emotion and override the mind. And yet, there do exist virtuous alternatives to the depravity which oppresses you.
So that's Lady Reason, little taste. And then there's one other track I thought I would put a little clip of from the opera. So something really kind of wild about the original is that it is written, it has 2 different authors who wrote, oops, okay, something came up, but I'm going to ignore that. What was I saying? Oh yes, so there's two parts of the original poem. Jean de Meun wrote a strange allegorical courtly love story. It seemed to break off maybe in the middle, and then we don't really know what happened to him. 50 years later, someone else came along, Guillaume de Loris. I think I have those switched. It was first Guillaume de Loris and then Jean de Meun, and wrote a continuation, which was 4 times as long. And really, that's where a lot of the more bizarre kind of philosophy and speculation and strange sexual hijinks comes in. And that whole thing now is the Romance of the Rose. So there's sort of a similar mirroring effect in my opera in that the first act is a little bit more coherent. It's within this dream world. The quest seems pretty straightforward. A bunch of stuff happens at the end of the first act, which is seemingly not what anyone expected. And then the second half starts to turn darker and weirder, and the dream world kind of starts to come in and out as we realize that there's something else going on, something real. So I thought I would play a song from the beginning of the second act. And this is actually the scene that we were working on right when we shut down all the production in early March. So it's now kind of been stamped with this other strange meaning for me. And it actually is an old song that I wrote years before I even had thought of writing this opera. And it's just kind of a torch song, a pop song. I was a singer-songwriter a million years ago. But something about it now feels to me like the insertion of this kind of real song that comes from outside of the opera at a moment when the characters are starting to really look at each other in a different way and think about what the stakes are, aside from this sort of allegorical quest. But mostly I just want to play it because Josh and I made this recording and he did all this beautiful multi-tracking on violin and viola. I'm actually only going to play the last verse, so you won't hear too much of it, but just again, maybe to show how much different music there is in the opera, which was something I felt emboldened to do by the fact that there is so much different kind of thought in the original poem. So this is called Torch Song, and I'm just going to play the second verse, which is on the right-hand side of the page there. Let's see. So those are some clips from this opera. I think I will see if there are any, it looked like maybe like a Q&A popped up. So I think I'm gonna stop screen sharing, see if anyone wants to ask any questions about this opera or anything else. And then I had another project that I was going to show you guys some stuff from. So I am going to stop share.
Hey,
Oh,
that was awesome. Thank you so much.
I had this feeling that like the whole time just nothing was working, and I was like talking to myself. I was like, well, whatever. Okay.
I know it's a really strange feeling, but I can assure you I was here listening and enjoying, and it was so interesting to hear all of these different kinds of music that you're bringing into this one opera.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we have one question here, and then we have a couple questions from Instagram, and then if anyone else has questions in the meantime, you can pop them into the Q&A at the bottom.
Okay. And then I'll if I play this other stuff, then I'll also leave a little time at the end too for more.
Sure, that sounds perfect.
Okay.
So we have a question from Andrea. She says, can you talk a little bit about the material that goes into your pieces? I've been struggling with being able to get the most out of the little blurbs / ideas I write in my compositions. So maybe a little bit about your process.
Yeah. I think Andrea, is that what it is? Yeah. So yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, I think actually the next thing I'm going to talk about might be interesting to you, because I think sometimes stitching little blurbs together is what turns into an opera. Like, I think if you have an instinct towards something, you always have to start somewhere. And I think if something occurs to you that is strong, if it's like a sounding image or just a way that you want an instrument to appear on stage, that can be enough of a like germ of sand to start like shaping the pearl around. So I think maybe it's just a matter of accumulation. And if you find yourself working on something enough and just kind of sitting with it every day, you can start to see things grow, and then you can start to stitch, you know, things that seem to be disparate together. I find that when I'm working on something over a long period of time, there's like a turning point when suddenly literally everything I do just seems to relate to it. Like, I go to the grocery store and there's like, I don't know, like roses for sale. I'm like, oh my God, of course, like the grocery store, the roses, the opera. So, I mean, that was a dumb made up example, but basically you'll start to kind of see your piece in other things that you're doing, or you'll like read a book or listen to some music or go to the movies. And because you're working on something in disparate elements, there's always a chance for something to talk to one of those elements. So yeah, I think just don't worry too much about, I don't remember the exact phrasing of the question, but about how the material is going to coalesce. Just sort of trust that it will, and follow it and follow what you're interested in, and try to like finesse that and see what it turns into.
Yeah, that's great advice that I think we all need to hear at different points in the process, no matter how far along we are.
Yeah.
So we have a couple questions from Instagram as well.
Okay.
So this is from Audrey. Do you have any advice for young composers looking to get more exposure, to get your music out there?
Well, I think this is different for young composers than it was when I was a younger composer, because of social media, basically. So I don't know. I mean, some things that I think have been useful for me is that I am a performer and I'm also a writer. So I can do a lot of the heavy lifting myself. So if there's something that you can do to actually like physically manifest your work, that can be useful. Of course, it's not necessary, and if that's just not what you're interested in, then you shouldn't feel like you have to do that. But it can just be helped to be kind of involved in the production. And actually, I think to an extent, you kind of have to do that, whether it's, you know, being actually on stage yourself or just like kind of gathering people or making it happen. So yeah, I think just anything you can do. You know, it's I'm working on another project now, and it's, you know, you have an idea, and it's nice to have an idea, but it, like, people can't interact with it until it exists. So you just have to do all this work to kind of make it real, and just figure out what pieces of those puzzles you can do, and the things that you can't do, see who's in your friend group, or your, you know, who you admire, who's in your generation, who you're working with, who also has similar concerns, and you can do something for them and they can do something for you. I've been part of an ensemble that's been really important for me to it's been very meaningful for me to be able to promote their work, and also it's been so wonderful for them to promote mine just by being co-collaborators. And then, you know, I'm not sure about otherwise how to get it out there, or you know, the various channels that exist now. I feel like I have younger students that I've talked to who feel some anxiety and pressure about that. So I think it might be more useful just to focus on making the thing and having it so that you can show it to people who want to see it. And then I think people will be interested, you know. They'll start with your friends and family and, you know, school and community, and move out from there.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think it's even easier today to really just see your life reflected in your social media channels in a way that I think was true. I mean, certainly wasn't true 10 years ago, and
you know,
pressure built.
Right, like you know, it doesn't, 10 years ago doesn't seem like that long of a time, but that's basically when I was in school, and I think it was different. I certainly felt pressure and anxiety, but it was not coming from this kind of inchoate universe of social media the way that I think it is now, and I think that does make some things harder.
Yeah, it's certainly different.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of questions coming in here. So let me just check a couple. So from Kira, we have, "Hi Kate, first just wanted to say you're one of my biggest role models, so thanks for being you. Anyway, what does your schedule tend to look like as a composer performer, and have you found any particular methods you use to effectively balance your time between practicing and composing?"
No, that's been a challenge. So my schedule, for me, I think it's been necessary to really have a hierarchy. So I am a composer first and then a performer. And I think for me, I actually have kind of recently realized I really cannot continue to do both of those things at the level that I feel the creative need to. Some people can, and I'm amazed at those people. But so I think at the time when I was most sort of at my peak performance and peak composing, I think I'm still, you know, composing as much, but performing more. The schedule was pretty insane. So it was just, you know, constant travel, constant composing. Since I'm a composer first and a writer, and being a composer and a writer are both things that you can do lazily while never, you know, getting out of your pajamas and drinking 4 beers every night, then suddenly I would sort of realize, like, oh my gosh, I have a big gig and I have to sing like several high Ds that I wrote, and I better start practicing. So I think for me, the physical discipline of being a performer is hard to keep up with when you also need time for self-care, and then I also have a full-time teaching job, and, you know, I want to have a life. So so I think it's just, I think having a schedule and making time for things like self-care is useful for that, and a routine. I am sort of stepping away from performing at the level that I write for, in a way. So I think I love performing, but I'm trying to find things that don't require me to really sing scales for an hour every other day, because I'm just not disciplined enough. But I think if you have an opportunity, if you have like a window of your life where you really do have a lot of time to work on your own stuff, maybe that's grad school or you know, whatever, then it's good to really do that and push yourself and sort of know what your limits are. But yeah, that's hard. I think there's so many rewards to doing both things, but I think it's difficult. It doesn't leave a ton of room for other intense activities or occupations.
Yeah,
Although discouraging, but
no, I mean, I definitely feel that.
Yeah,
it's really hard to balance those two things. That's really
and thank you for your nice words, Kira.
So from Lucy, she says, "Your music seems heavily influenced by literature and often classical literary ideas. What prompted your love for language and story, and moreover, what draws you to the texts that you pick?"
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think I just always was a bookworm, just the way that everyone was always something. And then just because I'm a composer, I think this is a nice thing about being a composer, is that whatever you always also were, like I was also really interested in baking, or I was like you know, really loved to play soccer. Like somehow that can be part of being a composer, I think, because music is just sort of like stretchy enough to encompass all other human pursuits. So yeah, it's just, I think I was avidly reading and writing before I was avidly composing, at least at the same time. And then what was the second part? What draws you to?
What draws you to the text that you pick?
Okay. I think for that, maybe I will like segue back into my PowerPoint, because I think the next thing that I'm going to talk about is relevant to that.
Yeah.
So,
we do have some more questions, but we can take them. We can take them.
Right. Well, maybe I'll, yeah. So maybe I'll go until like 6 and then we'll have 15 minutes. Seem okay?
That sounds great. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So
then I will disappear.
Going back in. Okay. So screen share. Wait, yes. Okay. Right. So, Lucy, I think it was the question about what kinds of texts, how do I know what text to write or what to use? This brings me to this next project, Unwritten Operas. So this is something that I started in March, and I think I'm done now. I might do some more at some point. But as I mentioned, I had the opera was, we kind of stopped all production for health and safety reasons in March, and just all went our separate ways. And I had been on leave from teaching for the opera, so I suddenly found myself in Western Massachusetts just with like my head spinning, just, you know, coming from getting on tech week to like nothing. And was feeling the need to be creative and to keep some momentum going. And then another thing that's instigated this project is that I no longer live in the same city as my collaborators. I still collaborate with them, but I've been sort of feeling the need or asking the question of what can I produce 100% on my own now? And sort of someone's earlier question about how do you get it out there? Like, is there some way to share what I'm doing without having to like travel all the time? So those were a couple of questions that went into this Unwritten Operas thing. But then also this idea of what draws me to which books. I think I kind of have a running tally in my head all the time of things that I read that I'm just like, oh, that would be like a killer opera, or like I really would love to explore that character. But I just don't have time to write all the like 100 operas. I would love to, but it's just not going to happen. So, you know, Romance of the Rose is now going on 3 years, and my other operas all have taken more than a year. So Unwritten Operas is basically a way for me to give myself permission to just do some little chunk of something that kind of really caught my eye and present it as a piece. And what the format ended up being is a series of YouTube videos. There are 12 of them, I think, that start with me rambling on about literary analysis or whatever I really found compelling about this story, and then goes into kind of like a musical reading of the text. And then I think, you know, they ended up being a bunch of pretty different things. So I'm not sure if there's some common thread about what I like to set, but I think, again, but going back to what I said about why make something into an opera, there's some feeling that music could have something to do with the text, that it could reveal some dimension that's kind of hard to put into words. So I was going to play clips from maybe 3 of these, and I'll play a little bit of the first one. So the first one that I made is based on Virginia Woolf's Orlando, which I think Olga Neubert, just made an opera of this. So it's already an opera, and maybe other people, I don't know. But this is a book that I read years ago and thought like, oh yes, this is operatic in some way. In a way, it is also allegorical, like the Romance of the Rose. And it is sort of an allegory of how, as you go through life, you really do become a different person at different parts of your life, but somehow you're the same consciousness all the way through. And that's kind of something to grapple with. And Virginia Woolf has a really interesting and kind of fun and brilliant and funny way of talking about this. And there is a particular passage in Orlando that I think was one that I was just like, I would love to work with this somehow. So in this video, it's just this passage. So I think I'll just play it. So this is Virginia Woolf's texts and then me kind of singing over the top of it. And this is the first video of this series I made. So I'm going to skip my insightful literary babble and just go right to the reading. So this is Orlando by Virginia Woolf.
Orlando heaved a sigh of relief, lit a cigarette, and puffed for a minute or two in silence. Then she called hesitatingly, as if the person she wanted might not be there. Orlando? For if there are, at a venture, 76 different times, all ticking in the mind at once, how many different people are there not, heaven help us, all having lodgment at one time or another in the human spirit? Some say 2052. So that it is the most usual thing in the world for a person to say, directly they are alone, Orlando, if that is their name, meaning by that, come, I am sick to death of this particular self, I want another. Hence the astonishing changes we see in our friends. But it is not altogether plain sailing either, for though one may say, as Orlando said, being out in the country and needing another self presumably, Orlando, still the Orlando she needs may not come. These selves of which we are built up, one on top of another, as plates are piled on a waiter's hand, have attachments elsewhere, sympathies, little constitutions and rights of their own, call them what you will, and for many of these things there is no name, so that one will only come if it is raining, another in a room with green curtains, another when Mrs. Jones is not there, another if you can promise it a glass of wine, and so on. For everybody can multiply from his own experience the different terms which his different selves have made with him, and some are too wildly ridiculous to be mentioned in print at all. So Orlando, at the turn by the barn, called Orlando, with a note of interrogation in her voice. Orlando did not come.
Okay, so that was my first attempt at this. I just made it with my phone and Zoom recorder, but it felt good to, kind of be able to check one of these long, something off of this long list of books that I would love to make music with somehow, and to just get it out there. So I'm going to play, I think, a couple more. So the next one I want to do is another book that when I read, I was like, oh, there's just something in here that would be so cool in an opera. And this is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which is just like a brilliant, it's a wonderful novel, but it's also like a terrifying horror story. I'm going to spoil it a bit. So if you don't want to be spoiled, then maybe come back in 5 minutes. What fascinated me about this book, spoilers now commence, is that the main character, she basically kind of loses her mind through the course of the book, but Shirley Jackson really skillfully blurs the line between what could be just somebody going through too much kind of intense emotional experience and losing her mind, or someone who's being possessed by a supernatural evil spirit so that you don't really know. And she describes some experiences that I think, especially introverted composers can relate to, like how it can feel kind of shocking to suddenly be in a group of people who are paying attention to you, and how kind of making a move to get out of your shell can be a little bit traumatic. But then that kind of gets taken to an extreme by probably evil forces in the house, but I don't know. So what I wanted to do for this one was pick passages throughout the book that kind of traced this through line. And as I did that, as you'll hear, I kind of added these voices layering to create this kind of dissonant cloud, as a kind of, representation of this sense of increasing activity and increasing excitement that basically leads to self-destruction. So here is The Haunting of Hill House. And I'm skipping my talking about it. And this is all text by Shirley Jackson. So these are all from the point of view of the protagonist, from when she starts to go to this house. She's been invited to this haunted house as kind of a social experiment, to when she tries to leave the house.
Each year, one summer morning, the warm wind would come down the city street where she walked, and she would be touched with the little cold thought, I have let more time go by. Yet this morning, driving the little car, going docilely along the street, following the lines of traffic, stopping when she was bidden and turning when she could, she smiled out at the sunlight, slanting along the street, and thought, I am going. I am going. I have finally taken a step. Here she is, settling into Hill House. Eleanor, wondering if she were really here at all and not dreaming of Hill House from some safe spot, impossibly remote, looked slowly and carefully around the room, telling herself that this was real. These things existed, from the tiles around the fireplace to the marble cupid. These people were going to be her friends. Now she turns this kind of incredulous feeling towards herself. What a complete and separate thing I am, she thought. Going from my red toes to the top of my head, individually an I, possessed of attributes belonging only to me. I have red shoes, she thought. That goes with being Eleanor. I dislike lobster and sleep on my left side and crack my knuckles when I am nervous and save buttons. I am holding a brandy glass which is mine because I am using it and I have a place in this room. I have red shoes, and tomorrow I will wake up and I will still be here. This feeling turns to ecstasy. Eleanor thought, it is my second morning in Hill House and I am unbelievably happy. I have been frightened half out of my foolish wits, but I have somehow earned this joy. I have been waiting for it for so long. She smiled at herself in the mirror and told herself silently, you are happy, Eleanor. You have finally been given a part of your measure of happiness. Happiness starts to turn destructive. Suddenly, without reason, laughter trembled inside Eleanor. She wanted to reel, chanting across the stretches of the lawn. She wanted to sing and to shout and to fling her arms and move in great, emphatic, possessing circles around the rooms of Hill House. I am here! I am here! She thought. And finally, the last passage as she tries to leave the house when she takes one last action. I am really doing it, she thought, turning the wheel to send the car directly at the great tree at the curve of the driveway. I am really doing it. I am doing this all by myself. Now, at last, this is me. I am really, really, really doing it by myself. In the unending, crashing second before the car hurled into the tree, she thought clearly, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Why don't they stop me?
Okay, so that's Haunting of Hill House. I'm just going to play a couple minutes now of one to lighten the mood a bit. So those two were both done with hardly any vocal processing. I just kind of like sang over the track I recorded of myself reading. But I think this is the 8th one I made, maybe, is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, which is a book I loved when I was in middle school, I still love. And it has a lot of really wild, wacky imagery, and I wanted to use it as a springboard to kind of explore, just doing different techniques with my voice and then doing different electronic processes with those techniques. So this is a scene, I won't set it up too much, but basically there's a couple of people who have been picked up by a weird spaceship, but there's just a lot of they're in this strange situation where many bizarre things are just kind of like popping up And each one was a really fun musical object for me to play with. So this is, I'll just play a little bit of this one. This is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
On the pavement lay Ford Prefect and Arthur Dent, gulping like half-spent fish. "There you are," gasped Ford. "I told you I'd think of something." "Oh, sure," said Arthur, "sure. Bright idea of mine to find a passing spaceship and get rescued by it." The real universe arched sickeningly away beneath them. Various pretend ones flitted silently by, like mountain goats. Primal light exploded, splattering space-time as with gobbets of junket. Time blossomed. Matter shrank away. The highest prime number coalesced quietly in a corner and hid itself away forever. "What sort of ship are we in?" asked Arthur, as the pit of eternity yawned beneath them. "I don't know," said Ford. They watched with a certain unease as huge children bounced heavily along the sand, and wild horses thundered through the sky. Wild yowling noises of pipes and strings seared through the wind. Hot donuts popped out of the road for 10 pence each. Horrid fish stormed out of the sky, and Arthur and Ford decided to make a run for it. They plunged through heavy walls of sound, mountains of archaic thought, valleys of mood music, and suddenly heard a girl's voice. 2 to the power of 100,000 to 1 against and falling. What was that voice? I don't know, it sounded like a measurement of probability. Probability? What do you mean? Probability, you know, like 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 5 to 4 against. It said 2 to the power of 100,000 to 1 against. That's pretty improbable, you know.
I think I will stop that there. So I'm going to go back to questions, but that is Unwritten Operas that kind of got me through March, April, and May here.
Again, thank you so much for sharing. I feel like you should go on like a one-woman tour and just like do all of these, like Kate Soper's Unwritten Operas.
Well, the whole point is I don't have to go anywhere. I can just put them on YouTube.
Down the road.
Yes,
You know?
yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Just you on a stool with a spotlight.
I love that, just like reading books and funny voices. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love how your music takes you on such an emotional roller coaster, and I don't mean that in like the cliche way, but I mean like it can be super, super serious and even like frightening with The Haunting of Hill House, which I now want to read.
Oh, it's incredible. I hope you're not turned off by being spoiled.
No, I actually prefer to be spoiled because I'm a scary cat.
Okay.
But you know, something really frightening like that, and then something like very like overtly whimsical, you know, like the last piece you played.
Yeah, I mean, I love kind of emotional whiplash in my art that I consume, and I like to produce that too. I think it's something that music does so well, you know.
Right. So we do have a couple more questions. So from Cece, we have, first I want to say I really loved everything you played. Also, I was so excited to see you've worked with Kelsey Bell, who's one of my favorite singers. My question is, how did you discover that you were interested in writing operas as a career, and how did you work on developing that skill?
I'm just smiling because I wish I wrote operas as a career. I mean, I guess I do, but I don't write operas for a living, sadly. I teach for a living. But, well, I think, let's see. So what was the second part of the question? The first was, how
did you figure out you were interested in writing operas, and how did you work on developing the skill?
Oh, yeah. So I think for me, it just seemed, you know, I'm obsessed with literature, and I'm a musician, and I'm a singer. It seemed like the best way to explore some of these ideas. It's also, I really love thinking in music and through music, and I think opera is a great platform to do that. And then some of the first opera that I wrote actually was I was with Gelsey Bell and Brett Umlauf, who I also mentioned. The three of us were in it together, and it was called Here Be Sirens. And I was trying to explore a complex topic, which is sirens. Like, what are they? As these images of, you know, dangerous musical females. And then as a performer, I also wanted to experience something more direct than I'd been doing as an experimental music soprano. And opera was just a place where I thought I can put all of my intellectual curiosities, all of my emotional questions, and also feel good about wanting to entertain and shock and make people laugh or freak out or cry or whatever. So I think it's just, I'm very interested in the multidimensionality of that world. And story and plot are things that I've always been really interested in. And I think it's been a part of my abstract non-vocal music too. But it's been nice to have to work on that as an opera composer, because you do have to get used to working in non-abstracts, which I think can feel a little bit weird if actually you've spent more of your career writing, you know, string quartets or something. So I think I've developed it. That was one of the questions here. How did I develop that? It's been important to have collaborators. I think that's, you know, a theme of all my work. So it was really important for me to have musical collaborators in wet ink that really helped shape me as a performer. But as a opera librettist and composer now, it's important to have theater experts around, directors and dramaturgs, people who can just kind of say, you know, this, I know you really love the music you wrote here, but the scene is not working and it has to go. Or like, you know, I know you think that you kind of understand who this character is, but no one is going to know that unless you give it to us. You know, and it doesn't mean that you have to be obvious about anything, or you can't be subtle. And it could be a very abstract opera, but you just have to think about the theatrical dimension. Something that was amazing to me in this Romance of the Rose process, I think because I'm not in it, which I haven't done an opera where I wasn't in it before. I think as a composer, I think we're all used to the experience of writing something and then it sounds totally different in the first rehearsal and you have to kind of make all these changes. But I thought I had written all the music and felt confident about it, but then it just looked so different. It just felt so different on stage to see people walking around and doing it, that I realized, oh, that process exists here too. Like, you just don't know what is going to happen when two human beings are interacting in this thing that you imagined, and actually it's all wrong, or like it needs to happen later, or there needs to be 5 more people there. So I think I developed the skills just like all of us do through, you know, working a lot on my own, but then also trial and error and surrounding myself with people who know more about it than I do. And then, yeah, as a career, it's just like, I can't think of anything better that I would rather do than be able to write operas forever and just take these big topics and really work them through with characters and music and amazing people around me.
It seems like it's something that comes very naturally out of just like your other loves. Like, it's an intersection of everything that you were already interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great intersection. It's just, yeah. And I think opera can mean so many things now that it's probably true of many people, but I do feel like for me, this is like, yeah, it's my jam.
And to continue with that, Anna has a question. When you hopefully return to Romance of the Rose post-COVID, will this experience shape how you continue to workshop it?
The experience meaning?
Like how you've continued to work on it since COVID, or like maybe perhaps the time that you're taking away from actively workshopping it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting. I you know, this has been, I'm sort of an incorrigible reviser. Like, it's really hard for me to say like, this is the final version. And for this opera, there's been many like complete versions that have been kind of, you know, torn up and cannibalized. And the version we were working on that we were going to premiere, you know, 2 months ago, I really thought that was it. But again, like the scene that we were like really working the scene really hard right when we shut down, that again had this torch song, and it seemed like such a straightforward scene, but there was I was like, there's something there, like something really important is not being allowed to come through. So actually, in the few weeks after the production, I made some small, but I think crucial changes to who is saying what to whom, when. And it's possible that would have happened before we opened, but you know, in the few weeks before you open an opera, you also are just like freaking out about like, you know, we don't have the right hat for like Lady Reason in season 2 or whatever. So that was interesting. And now I thought like, well, I'll just go through and incorporate all the tiny little changes we made into a new clean version of the score. And I am finding that I am changing a few things that it's making it stronger. I think once I'm done with this round of edits, I'll just say, you know, we are hopeful that we can do it with Peak next season. But I think my work will be done, I think, after the next few weeks. But yeah, it was really odd. I think I'll have to look back and see how my thoughts about the opera have changed given the time that we're living through. But yeah, I mean, I was able to sculpt some things in this like vacuum after kind of having this really intense experience with this incredible cast and incredible crew, and then go home and think about it and think about what I'd learned.
Great. Well, I'm excited to hear the fully edited version.
Yes.
We have a technical question here from Lily, I think in reference to the bits of the Unwritten Operas that you showed us. How are you stringing together all of those different recordings, and is it being controlled with a patch?
Okay, so the process of doing those operas is I would, so I would make the recording of me speaking the thing, doing the performance, and I would simultaneously, you know, film myself on my phone and then have this thing like on some books. And then I would take that audio recording. So now I had a good audio recording on this Zoom, and put it into Reaper, which is the program I've been using lately. And basically then just work that up like a tape piece, but use my spoken text as the template and not deviate from that, because then I would have to make that tape piece and then resync it to the video. So I'll just talk about the Hitchhiker's Guide, since that's the one that has processing. For that one, you know, there are a couple max patches in there, and a bunch of different other effects. But like you do with a tape piece, I think I would just, you know, for that one especially, because there were like all these different things, like, okay, here's like goats, here's primal light exploding. I would just maybe go make a recording in Max and put that back in the Reaper file. Maybe go, I don't know, use some external effects and put that there and just, you know, render it down. So nothing was done live. The only thing that was done live was the actual reading. And then everything else was, yeah, I think the programs I mostly used were just the Reaper effects, Max. I used Spear for one of them, maybe a couple other things. Yeah, and then I would, you know, write the music and do all the multi-tracking myself in Reaper also. So I hope that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, so lots of different like ways that you're kind of.
Yeah, I think some people thought I was like reading along to a pre-recorded track, but no, I like all the music came later. First, I just got the track down.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So we have a bunch more questions here. Let me just see. Okay, so from Ash, I have always admired you for being such an amazing composer performer as well as a collaborator. I am also an aspiring composer performer, but I find myself compromising my vision as a collaborator. How do you hold your own unique voice in a collaborative setting?
That's a great question. And I think you just have to know what you want to collaborate on and what you don't want anyone to tell you what to do about. That was not very grammatical, but I think you know what I mean. So, for me, I think something that I realized after having some experiences that made me unhappy is that I have to be the author of the thing I'm doing. So I can't like set someone else's libretto to music. I'll just be a terrible person to work with, and I'll sulk about it, and you know that takes half the fun away from me. That, you know, it's like such an important part of why I do what I do. And I didn't know that for a while because as composers, I think, I set plenty of other texts that I didn't write. So it didn't occur to me that I need to be the one curating all those texts. So now I know that, but then I think there was a time when I was doing my opera Ipsa Dixit, or opera-ish thing, with some really dear collaborators in wet ink. And I thought, like, well, maybe I'll just direct it, because I sort of knew we needed some kind of direction. And I thought, like, I could like make some costume, or, we would go to venues and they would have a lighting board and I'd be like, this movement should have blue light, and then think like, move over Scorsese or something. But I think I've now realized, like, no, I don't know anything about it. I'm a total noob for theater. I love it. I've done some sound design work, and I've written operas. I'm not a complete newbie, but there are people who have honed their vision, who just see things that I don't see, and I need their help. And so, like, the director for Romance of the Rose, Michael Rao, he's read so many versions of the libretto. He would ask really important questions that I wouldn't be able to see. Same was true for Sirens. I was with a really interesting group of people at the Radcliffe Institute when I was writing that, who helped me. Like, I remember I was there with Lydia Diamond, who's a great playwright, and there was this thing in the opera that happened like 4 times, and she was like, people are just going to think that you don't realize it needs to be either 3 or 7. And it's kind of a cliche, but she was totally right. Just some beats that, like things that you would notice if that was your whole world. So I think, yeah, to be a good collaborator, you just have to be really open in the aspects that you recognize you need to collaborate on. And none of us can do everything, so it's really wonderful thing to have collaborators. And then the things that you need to be your domain, you still need to have voices, you still need to have help and trusted people to like listen and give you feedback. But you should know to protect that, because for the other people too, because you don't want to compromise your vision, and you don't want to be a drag to work with if you say that you're going to collaborate on something and then you like end up not really being able to go through with it. So yeah, I think as a performer, for me, it's been amazing to collaborate, because I didn't really have much of a vocal background. So just being in the presence of my fellows in wet ink was amazing for me. And I was always really grateful for their support and feedback. But yeah, I think it's just about knowing yourself, and knowing what you need, and knowing, also how you can be useful to others, how you can collaborate with them on their own projects too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So if you're up for it, we could do one more question. We're a little over time here.
I can do one more question.
Okay, we'll do one more. So this is from Maya. She says, thank you so much for sharing your work. I really appreciate the emphasis you place on philosophical or aesthetically complex texts, especially in the context of the female voice, which has long been neglected in this aspect. I was especially curious as to your treatment of time when curating a pre-existing text. And she says, right now I'm culling text for 2 major projects. And how do you deal with the discrepancy between the time required to comprehend or obscure a spoken versus sung versus declamated concept?
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that it's easy to lose sight of, because if you're the composer and you're also compiling the texts, everything so intimately, you forget that like someone's going to look at their program and it's over. So for me, I think this is part of why I make a really liberal use of spoken text in my operas or anything, even like chamber music. And I think that's also because as a performer, I'm just so aware that the second I start singing, there's just a completely different energy coming to me. And I'm not able to communicate in the same kind of literal way. My opera, Here Be Sirens, is basically all about that, actually. So I think you have to make some decisions about when words are a texture and when they're meaning that has to get through. And, there's tools that we can use to enhance meaning. It doesn't have to be, it's not always just intelligibility. It can be repetition or, proportion, so, or, even just things like orchestration. So I think you just have to think about what has to get across, what needs to be clear, and what you need to sacrifice therefore. Like there's times when I've changed something into spoken text from sung because I realized no one was going to hear it and it was important to hear it. And maybe vice versa sometimes too, I don't know. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of trying to be clear about what is really happening and listen and just think about the long gradient of understanding text versus not understanding. It's not just talking to you like I'm talking to you now over Zoom versus singing above the staff with a full orchestra. Like there's many things in between that are more or less clear. And then just, give yourself permission to use all of those or as many as you need, as often as you need without worrying about being consistent, or that's what I do, so.
Yeah. I love your statement that it can be texture a lot of times too, like there's purposeful obscuring of the text. It's actually really interesting to think about.
Yeah, and I mean, when you read poetry, I mean, poetry is not always about, a lot of written word is not really just about content or meaning. There's stuff behind the written word without music too. So I think that should make us feel okay about basically reaching behind the words and setting that stuff and being okay with the words getting lost sometimes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was a really, really illuminating talk. The last thing I'll say is just, how can we follow what you're working on in this probably next, couple of months or year that we'll not be able to see anything live?
Sure. Well, I do have a YouTube channel. All of the Unwritten Operas are on there, so you can watch those. I'm starting another YouTube project that I will shortly begin to, well, I have to finish it, but there will be other stuff happening there. I don't have Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook or any of that thing, but I have a website, katesoper.com, with some stuff on there. So yeah, I'd say that I have a mailing list, but I don't know if I have a button where you can join it now, but I'm working on that.
Okay.
But my email's on my website too, so if you want to get in touch, and I'm not always a great correspondent, but I'm around. And thank you for being here, all of you out in internet land. And Erin, thank you for setting this up and having.
Thank you so much this was an amazing first of 10 workshops. I'm really excited to have all of you here. Thank you all for coming. You will be linked to a survey, just as a heads up. We really appreciate your time just to be here and also for the survey. And thank you again, Kate. This was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, see you next time, everyone.